In 2021 and 2022, a number of electric vertical takeoff and landing, or eVTOL startups, listed their shares on US stock exchanges by merging with SPACs, collectively raising billions of dollars. The consulting firm McKinsey Company says the eVTOL market could be worth tens of billions of dollars by 2030. Morgan Stanley goes even further, saying that eVTOLs, or flying cars as we'll call them, could create a $1.5 trillion market by 2040. ARK Invest says that advances in technology will cause eVTOL prices to drop precipitously, making them commercially viable alternatives to ground-based taxis. Currently, there are no commercial eVTOL services in the US because no eVTOL has yet received regulatory approval. But once they are approved, there will supposedly be thousands of eVTOLs flying around major cities, flying hundreds of thousands of passengers. However, if we even applied the most basic amount of economic logic, we will see that eVTOLs have zero chance of being commercially viable. In our opinion, even if any of these eVTOLs get regulatory approval, all they will accomplish is burning any money investors are willing to give them. Join us as we take a deep dive into the eVTOL industry and show why this may be one of the dumbest ideas ever cooked up by Wall Street. One of the most difficult aspects of investing in disruptive technology is separating out realistically achievable ventures from speculative hype. Luckily, the best way to stay up to date on the latest technological concepts doesn't require thousands of dollars or years of schooling. It's actually free and easy. Brilliant is the best way to learn math, data science, and computer science interactively. It's fun and interactive, with thousands of lessons from basics to advanced topics, and new lessons added every month. My personal favorite is their Thinking in Code course, which gets you designing simple programs to solve real-world problems right away, from Maps app navigation to writing a program that automatically responds to work messages. Their intuitive drag-and-drop coding gets you up and running immediately. The interactive learning that Brilliant provides is proven to be 6 times more effective than passive learning, like watching lecture videos. This means you can master big concepts in as little as 15 minutes per day. Even if you're not trying to advance your career, the courses are just fun. Brilliant makes learning feel almost like playing a video game. To try everything Brilliant has to offer, free, for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/wallstreetmillennial or click the link in the description. The first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. An eVTOL is an electric aircraft which can take off and land vertically. Vertical takeoff and landing is nothing new. That's exactly what a helicopter is. The first helicopter capable of carrying a human pilot was created by the French inventor Paul Cornu in 1907, more than a century ago. eVTOLs have a few advantages over traditional petroleum-powered helicopters. If you charge the battery with renewable electricity, it can have zero emissions. Because it doesn't have an internal combustion or jet engine, it may require less maintenance, although this is impossible to know for sure as none of them are yet operating commercially. And finally, they can be much quieter. In many other aspects, eVTOLs are inferior. Traditional helicopters can have a flight range of up to 1,200 miles, while eVTOLs are expected to have ranges of about 150 miles at most. Cargo helicopters can carry tens of thousands of pounds. This would be impossible for an eVTOL due to the constraints of battery power. And finally, helicopters can be refueled quickly, while an eVTOL would take longer to recharge. To estimate the size of the eVTOL market, we first need to analyze the traditional helicopter industry. There are 2 types of helicopters, turbine and piston. Turbine helicopters are powered by a jet engine. They generally cost more than $1 million and have superior power and range. Piston helicopters are powered by internal combustion engines. They're much smaller and cheaper, only costing a few $100,000. They usually only have 1 or 2 seats, so they can only be used for photography and by personal hobbyists. eVTOLs are expected to cost $3 to $5 million, orders of magnitude more expensive than piston helicopters. They are thus unlikely to take significant market share from the piston helicopter market. The turbine helicopter market is relatively small. According to the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, there were 1,300 new turbine helicopters shipped globally in 2019. About 600 of them were military helicopters. eVTOLs lack the range or power for the vast majority of military applications. Of the 700 civilian helicopters sold, a substantial number of them were for search and rescue, medevac, or police. eVTOLs lack the power or range to be viable alternatives for these use cases. Due to their low range, the only place eVTOLs can take market share is urban transportation, which only represents a few hundred helicopters per year at most. According to VTOL.org, there are over 350 eVTOL startups working on over 600 eVTOL designs. They have collectively raised billions of dollars, and each one plans to eventually make hundreds, if not thousands of aircraft per year. Currently, the current helicopter market cannot soak up this amount of supply, so there need to be new use cases. The consensus among eVTOL bulls is that they will not compete with traditional helicopters. Instead, they'll compete with taxis. eVTOLs will operate as flying taxis in densely populated cities. The idea of flying taxis sounds appealing. Large cities suffer from congestion, making travel by car frustratingly slow. Specifically, eVTOL companies plan to offer flights between airports and city centers. For example, Joby Aviation, which is one of the largest publicly traded eVTOL companies, says that it will be able to take passengers from the JFK airport to Manhattan in less than 10 minutes, a journey which would take about 40 minutes by car. In 2019, Uber launched the Ubercopter, a helicopter service which can take passengers from JFK to a heliport in lower Manhattan in just 8 minutes. It costs $205, which is more expensive than an Uber car and orders of magnitude more expensive than public transportation. But maybe some rich people could find value in the time savings. CNN sent a correspondent to see what's what. The total trip length on the Ubercopter was 55 minutes. So how did an 8-minute flight end up taking 55 minutes? That's because they only have one specific drop-off point in lower Manhattan. So unless your final destination happens to be within walking distance to the heliport, you have to get a ground-based taxi for the first and last legs of the journey. It would have been faster and cheaper to just get a ground-based Uber or public transportation. The Ubercopter failed to provide a compelling value proposition, so very few people used it. There's another company called Blade Air Mobility, which also provides helicopter rides between JFK and Manhattan for a price of $195 per passenger. Blade went public via a SPAC in 2020. While they claim to make a positive contribution profit, they still have a negative adjusted EBITDA. They are burning cash, and the share price has declined by almost 2/3 since its IPO. Joby Aviation claims that their eVTOLs will be much more successful than helicopter flights. They plan to set the price similar to an Uber Black car ride. An Uber Black ride between JFK and Times Square costs about $100. As we will show, there's no way an eVTOL operator could turn a profit at $100 per trip. Most of the eVTOL companies have set the prices of their aircraft between $3 and $5 million, which is more expensive than comparable turbine-powered helicopters. But they claim they'll be cheaper to operate because electricity is cheaper than aviation kerosene, and the lack of a jet engine should make maintenance easier. Blade has partnered with multiple eVTOL manufacturers and plans to transition some of its helicopter fleet to eVTOLs if and when they get FAA approval. Blade says that the fixed cost associated with operating an eVTOL is $939,000 per year, slightly more expensive than a traditional helicopter. Current FAA regulations prevent helicopter pilots from flying more than 1,000 hours per year. This is a safety consideration so the pilots don't get tired. Given that eVTOLs are a new technology, it is extremely unlikely that the FAA would decrease the standards, so 1,000 hours per year is probably the best we can expect. This translates to $939 per hour of fixed costs. The direct operating cost of a traditional helicopter is $600 per hour, which consists of maintenance and fuel. They say the eVTOL will only cost between $300 and $500 per hour to operate. Whether they use a traditional helicopter or an eVTOL, they still have to pay a $200 landing fee to the heliport for each ride. Based on these calculations, they say the eVTOL will cost $430 per flight, which is 14% cheaper than the traditional helicopter. However, this assumes that the FAA will allow the eVTOL to fly more than 1,000 hours per year, which seems unlikely. If we take down the flight hours to 1,000, the eVTOL would cost $460 per flight, only 8% cheaper than the turbine helicopter. Blade is already losing money offering its flights for $195. An 8% reduction in cost isn't going to get them anywhere close to $100 per flight. The only real advantage that eVTOLs have is the fuel cost, but this only represents a small percentage of the total operating costs. Most of the expense is the landing fees and fixed costs, which will be the same if not higher. We also don't know how long the batteries will last, as they'll be drained and charged at frequent intervals. And finally, super fast charging infrastructure does not yet exist at the heliport. This won't be cheap to build. eVTOLs are an unproven technology that at best will be marginally cheaper than helicopters for urban transport, which is a tiny and unprofitable market. So why are investors willing to give these companies billions of dollars? Let's look at the other side of the debate. Unsurprisingly, Cathie Wood's ARK Invest is one of the biggest eVTOL bulls. ARK also did an analysis of the cost of the eVTOL flight from JFK to Manhattan. Blade says the eVTOL flight will cost $430. ARK says that eventually the cost will decrease to just $180. If there are at least 3 passengers flying in the aircraft, you could charge a rate as low as $70 per person, which would be slightly cheaper than a ground-based taxi. So how do they expect to achieve such a massive reduction in cost? ARK makes 3 key assumptions. Firstly, they assume the eVTOL can operate 2,000 hours per year, double what a traditional helicopter can operate. Secondly, the cost of electricity and maintenance will be much lower. And finally, the landing fee will be much lower, because the fixed cost will be amortized across a larger number of flights. There are some 8,760 hours in a year, so 1,000 hours of flight time means the helicopter is idle almost 90% of the time. This could theoretically be improved, but the reason they can only fly 1,000 hours per year has nothing to do with the helicopter itself. These are FAA safety regulations to prevent the pilot from becoming tired. Why would they relax these requirements for eVTOLs? It is true that the electricity costs are much lower than fuel costs, but we don't know how long the batteries will last. Joby Aviation claims that their batteries will last for 10,000 flights, but that's based on tests they did in a lab, not from real-world flight data. The speed of battery degradation depends on temperature, humidity, vibration, and a whole host of other environmental factors. It's very difficult to simulate this realistically in a lab. Even for electric cars, which have much simpler and less powerful batteries than eVTOLs, there is substantial uncertainty about battery degradation. Even for cars of the same model and being operated by the same fleet, the rates of battery degradation can vary drastically, and researchers still don't fully understand why. The most important cost-saving assumption is the landing fees. Blade currently pays a $200 landing fee per helicopter to the downtown Manhattan heliport. According to ARK Invest, the entire trip, everything included, will only cost $180, less than the current landing fee alone. ARK assumes the landing fees can decrease by 75% to just $50. For their evidence, ARK points to a 2010 report by the Eastern Region Helicopter Council, a trade association for helicopter operators in the New York area. The report discloses that the downtown Manhattan heliport, which has 14 pads and flies 40,000 passengers per year, pays $1.3 million of lease payments to the city government. ARK did not disclose how they came up with their landing fee calculations, but it appears that they extrapolated this $1.3 million lease payment and massively increased the number of flights per year to decrease the cost. This $1.3 million lease is more than a decade out of date, and it doesn't include other operating costs such as employees, taxes, insurance, and maintenance. The heliport is operated by a private company that does not disclose their financial statements publicly, so we really have no idea how much it actually costs. Either way, ARK Invest assumptions would require building a new heliport and increasing the utilization by orders of magnitude. You can't just buy a piece of land in Manhattan and start flying eVTOLs. You need to get approval from the city. And there is substantial reason to doubt that the city will allow for a new privately owned heliport to operate massive volumes of flights. The more congested a heliport is, the more likely it is for incidents to occur. Not only is this common sense, we also have real-world evidence. In December of 2021, an NYPD helicopter crashed at the downtown Manhattan heliport. Luckily, nobody was seriously injured, but the helicopter suffered significant damage. According to the pilot, the helipad was congested with several other aircraft on the ground and 2 preparing to land. Due to the congestion, the pilot attempted a complex maneuver which ultimately caused the crash. ARK Invest appears to assume that the existing heliports are mostly idle, and just by reducing the price, you can get a huge amount of volume. But this assumption does not match up with reality. The heliport is already operating at a very high level, to the extent that at least sometimes it experiences dangerous levels of congestion. Because no eVTOL is yet operating commercially, investors like Cathie Wood are relying on various assumptions to justify a bull case. But these assumptions are extremely optimistic, and a lot of them make no sense. eVTOLs are cool, and people want to believe that they will revolutionize the transportation industry. A strong desire to believe in something can cause people to irrationally disregard practical realities. For example, Joby Aviation claims that they will eventually expand access of eVTOL ride-hailing to underserved rural communities. This is technologically impossible, because the eVTOLs don't have the required range to travel between rural communities and major population centers, and even if it was possible, which it's not, it would be completely unaffordable. Regarding eVTOL stocks, they may be remembered as one of the more questionable outcomes of the SPAC boom, with billions of dollars of investor capital at risk. It's important to cut through the noise of the Wall Street hype machine and analyze the situation from a standpoint of economic reality. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. What do you think about eVTOLs? Let us know in the comments section below. As always, thank you so much for watching and we'll see you in the next one. Wall Street Millennial, signing out.